Hey, what's up, everybody? We're here to talk about another Michael Crichton book I read, another oldie that I'd never read before, called The Terminal Man. And I'm noticing a trend with these older books. They tend to be much more medical-focused. I know he went to Harvard, and I think he was a professor there, Michael Crichton. I'm not sure. But it's something to do with that. I didn't realize, or I can't remember if he was like a medical guy, doctor, or researcher or something. I kind of think he was at some point. I just don't remember. Anyway, it seems like so. Just think about all the books he's ever written, how there's a lot of medical jargon and stuff. Generally, maybe it's just an area he was fascinated with and he wasn't really involved with that at all. I don't really know. Anyway, this one's called The Terminal Man, and The Terminal Man is like it's a thriller. So the previous one I just did, oh Lord, I like dump this stuff as soon as I walk away from it. The Maltese Falcon? No. I know that wasn't it. It was something abortion. The Case of Need, that's what it's called. It was like a detective story. This one's more of like a thriller, sort of like a medical thriller. He's not really in his groove yet. I think the next book he came out after this was The Congo, and that's like a definite thriller. And then he just kind of hits that hard with like Sphere. And no, maybe Sphere was the next one. One of those two. Both of those are movies that I remember being pretty good. I'd have to go back and watch them again to be completely honest to like truly remember. But I remember being young and watching them and being like, these are awesome. Just like Jurassic Park was. Like he had a whole series of like movies that came out. I think there might even be a movie about this, to be completely honest. I've never seen it, but it sounds like something my dad or something, or like walked in and somebody was watching one time, like after reading through this book. Okay, anyway, so it does the same thing as A Case of Need, where it's like the parts are days, so it goes like Tuesday to Thursday or Friday. It's not very like all these events happen pretty quick, and this book takes place in Los Angeles, which is always fun because that's another place. So I lived in Boston, I lived in Los Angeles, right? Hooray for me! I've lived in a lot of big, awful cities. But so it's fun when they like mention things like traffic. Like there's a whole section here where they just complain about traffic, and I'm like, God damn, yes. Things have not gotten better in the last 40, 50 years, right? Because this book was written in like the 70s, and I think it's supposed to take place in the 70s as well. And then it's pretty prescient, to be completely honest. There's a couple sections where they talk about like AI, and they like design this AI to be like good-natured, like this computer program. And this computer program was chatting with this other computer program that's supposed to be kind of nagging. And then at some point, the good-natured one becomes like very cynical and angry, and then the nagging one becomes like kind of nice and scared. And they're just like, that's not supposed to happen. And I'm like, this guy was like talking about shit that's happening right now with AI, like 50 years ago. I love it. Michael Crichton was such like not a prophet, but like he had good insight into like what the future would hold. So it's pretty good stuff. Anyway, so we begin on Tuesday with Dr. Morris, and he's waiting for a gentleman named Benson. And there's some sort of like neuropsychological surgery case, and he's very nervous about the whole thing. So he's been doing a lot of practice on monkeys and stuff. And then he's just thinking about like hospital life, and how good it is to be in the hospital, and like I think they call it the NIS or whatever. It's like the Neuropsychological Institute of Science or something at this hospital. And the hospital I don't think was ever identified. It's just like random hospital. Like random university hospital. I would assume it would be the Reagan Hospital at UCLA, because that's like the big university hospital in Los Angeles, because there's USC as well, but I don't even remember if they have a hospital system attached to them. But UCLA has like a gigantic hospital system, and they're very like keyed in on like scientific research when it comes to all these fields. They have a whole building dedicated to like psychological and neuropsychological research, which I worked at. Hooray! That's a fun story. Okay, anyway, so so it's like, okay, yeah, that actually does exist. Anyway, so eventually Benson shows up. Benson's a short, pudgy man. He's apparently some sort of like supercomputer expert with like a very high security clearance, because his company does a lot of like contracting with the U.S. government and stuff. But the police are bringing him in. Why are they bringing him in? Because he's been like fighting people, and he's got a lot of charges against him. So apparently the reason he does that is because he has these seizures where he blacks out and he becomes extremely violent, and then something about him being kind of like autistic or something maybe, and so that's why he's here, because he needs to get surgery to like stop these seizures or cause like an interruption in the seizures, so that he can stop being so violent or whatever. And then we hit up Grand Rounds time, and the Grand Rounds are being done, or they're being attended by Janet Ross, I think is her full name, who's a psychiatrist. She's the one who's been working with Benson this whole time. She talks about his history, how he did computer stuff, and then he started talking about how computers are going to take over everything, which is true. And then, and he was freaking out, and then he started like getting around, he'd get drunk and get into fights, and he'd not remember it, and he'd like wake up in random places and be totally confused. And it all happened after he got into like a car accident, which, yeah, I guess so. Because you hit your head hard enough, it can cause you to have seizures or other things. Let's see. And so they tried drugging him up. They tried therapy, nothing seemed to work, so now it's time for surgery. And this is like a new surgery that developed where they take like a computer, essentially like a tiny little computer with like plutonium in it to like power it, and then they like put it in your shoulder and attach it to like diodes in your brain through like your skin, and then when it like detects that you're about to have this guy's about to have a seizure, it like hits something in the brain to like cause the reverse interaction. Like they hit like pleasure sectors. And Janet Ross has a lot of concerns about this because there's been like studies in the past where they tried to do this with like gorillas or like rats, where they like gave them like a pleasurable chemical every time they did something, and they became like extremely addicted to this pleasurable feeling. And there's even like a hippie who shows up later on in the story, and he's like, yo man, hey man, I hear you can like you can send electricity into my brain, man, make me feel good, like an orgasm, man. And they're like, yes we can. And he's like, can I get that, man? And he's like, no. And then like one of the doctors calls him something derogatory, and it's like these like pleasure chasers. And I'm like, man, that you should definitely be doing that. That's like way better than drugs. Like just knock people the fuck out because they're getting so much pleasure all the time. And some of those studies that this guy mentions, like I've read about them. I don't know how credible they are in the long run, but it is kind of true. Like people are going to take the path of least resistance, and they're going to. So if you're giving them like drugs, right? Drugs are the perfect example. It's like, hey, you can work hard and sacrifice and find like little moments of joy, or you can take this cocaine and feel great. And you're like, cocaine sounds good. And then you take it, you're like, I love that. I'm going to keep taking it. And then people are like, why is this guy taking crack all the time or cocaine? And you're like, because it feels awesome, you idiots. Like, anyway. So, blah, 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 stop the violence, crazy discuss how this person... Oh, and then they have, like, a discussion about how this guy, like, a lot of Janet's concerns is that this guy also clearly has, like, he possibly has a psychotic disorder, and that he definitely has, like, a personality disorder. So, like, all these things combined are going to cause a lot of problems. And so, like, the surgery to put this thing in his body is not going to, like, solve any of these problems, and it might even make things worse. Okay, then they talk about doing the procedure, how it's not going to address psychological stuff. They're concerned about him killing himself. Oh, no. So, and then he thinks about, like, transplants and spending all this money on research and how, like, you have this patient and he's unstable. Like, you should really find a stable patient and try it with them first. And then he relates it back to this guy who got, like, a kidney transplant and then committed suicide later. And it's like, you could have given that kidney to, like, a healthy person. And that guy who killed himself with the kidney, he was, like, suicidal the whole time. But they just kept, like, rolling with it. And it's like, maybe you shouldn't give this suicidal guy, like, a kidney transplant because he's not going to, like, change his life for it. And they're like, no, we got to get the surgery done. And it's just kind of like, it's like the be wary of, like, people who are trying to accomplish things without trying to do it for the right reason, which definitely Morris, McPherson, and Ellis, who are the three neurosurgeons, and then Janet is the psychiatrist, like the main doctors that we get involved with. They're all like, no, we need to do this. And she's like, maybe we should think about this some more. Anyway, so they talk about this. So during the grand rounds, this all comes up and those questions come up. And then Morris is answering the grand rounds. And then he's leaving. And Janet is like, hey, maybe that guy's right. Maybe we should take a thought about this. And he's like, whatever, I'm leaving. And then, NPS. It's the Neuropsychological Research Center. And it's ran by McPherson, who's like the head guy. And then Morris is like the surgeon. And then Ellis is like a newer of the guys. Okay, so then she goes and talks to some of the other members. There's like tech nerds. And we get a little background of them. They're completely unimportant. They almost never come up again. There's like Gerhardt and Richardson, and we get like, one of them came from like a wealthy background. He was just like a mechanical genius, yada yada. The other guy did like technical brain work with like the government and like was hacking into stuff or whatever. And it's like we have this whole chapter that talks about them, and then they don't even like come up like again. So again, this you can tell this is like an early one of his books because it's like some of this stuff is like, why did you spend so much time? You should have just. I mean, it's like. It's not bad that you have the background, but I was like, oh, okay, I better pay attention. Like I wrote down these notes about like their backgrounds, and then I finished the book, and I was like, what? At some point, Janet heads up to Benson's room, and then the nurse there is like, who are you? And she's like, oh, I'm his doctor. And she's like, why'd they send a pediatrician to talk to this? And then she gets super mad, right? Because the only reason because most female doctors in this era are like pediatricians or nurses. And so, or because nurses aren't doctors, right? But anyway, so she's like, no, I'm a psychiatrist. And they're like, okay. Anyway, so she finds Benson. He's got a towel around his head because they had to shave his head so they could do brain surgery, right? And she thinks about that. She thinks about how her dad was like a surgeon and how he was ashamed because he didn't have a son, and she kind of psychoanalyzes herself for like a minute. Don't worry, none of that's that important. Again, it doesn't really ever come up ever again. But it's just good. You're just building the character. It's like, again, it's not bad. I'm just like, why you spent a lot of time in this, and then like it's irrelevant to like the rest of the story. Like the fact that her dad was a surgeon and she has some beef like comes up like here and like maybe one other time, but then like in the grand scheme of like the story, it's just like you're just like middling around. Like it's all good writing and it like makes sense and stuff. But at the same time, it's like it's one of those things where it's like, well, why? Why do I need to know this information? It's like you don't. All you need to know is like Janet doesn't get taken seriously because she's a woman. Like that part's extremely important because it comes up a couple times where where she like has opinions on things, and they're just like, all right, vagina, like go over there and have your menstrual cycle. Right? It's like, well, she was right. Maybe she was a man, they would have listened to her. But then the thing about her dad and stuff is kind of like, okay. Anyway, she goes to talk to Benson, and generally seems like in good spirits. He seems down for this whole thing. And then he talks about how he starts to feel weird and that he's about to have a seizure. And they should call for help because he can get very dangerous when he's having these seizures. So later on, McPherson and Richardson are having dinner with a hospital propagandist, right? So remember, Richardson, I think I mentioned this, is one of the nerds. And so they're talking about ADL. ADL is the type of seizures that Benson's having, and about how they're dealing with it, and how the ADL makes you violent, and how you can be easily intoxicated, and makes you extremely promiscuous, which is, it's like an excuse. Benson definitely gets it with the ladies, like prostitutes and strippers and stuff. But anyway, and then they tell a story about a woman who had ADL and how she'd have sex all the time, but she never felt satisfied or anything. And that this is the first time they're doing a surgery like this on humans. They've done it on apes and rats and stuff, and it's been pretty successful. And that they want to get like the news out to everybody and whatnot. Later on, we're sitting with Morris. He's like on call because McPherson, who runs the MPS, wants everybody, including like the neuropsychologists or the neurosurgeons who are psychiatrists. I don't know why they're doing this, but they got to be on call. So if someone shows up for like, because this whole place is doing like experiments and research and stuff, so to do the intakes, he wants even the heads of like the department, which are like Morris is one of the bigwigs, to like get practice and doing all this stuff. And so he's hanging around, and then this lady shows up, and she's like a beautiful young lady, and she's like, hey, I got this stuff for Benson, can I give it to him? And he's like, I'll give it to him. And he looks inside, and it's like a wig and some screwdrivers. And then she mentions that she left a message. Oh, she mentions that she left a message for him at her old place when he gets out. And he's like, okie dokie, sounds good. Later on, Janet checks the psych deck. The psych deck is some sort of like psychological test they did, and she's like looking through it and stuff. And then she shows it to Ellis and McPherson, and she's like, Benson's definitely psychotic. So she definitely did like a Rorschach test. And they talk about using Thorazine to calm him down, which is like a first edition, if you will. Antipsychotic, which has a lot of side effects, and it's pretty intense. We don't really use it that much anymore. I mean, we can because it's like severe cases and whatnot, but it'll calm you the fuck down. But how that's important to like make sure that he's getting Thorazine after this, because otherwise he might have like a psychotic break and the machines in his head, and that's one of the things he's like concerned with and he's like paranoia about, because you're putting wires in him and stuff. So anyway, Morris then, at the very end of like day 1 or Tuesday, is playing tennis with his homie of his named Kelso, and we get a whole backstory of him, which I'm not going to go into because he again never comes up again. And he's just thinking about how competitive he is, and how he talked to his psychiatrist friend about him, like Morris being super competitive, which is important to know because it's like what drives him to make sure the surgery happens or whatever. And he's like, I'm not a big fan of psychiatrists or psychoanalysts and stuff. I just want to like drill into the brain and put things in there. And then Kelso mentions at some point that the whole hospital is going to be watching them tomorrow, that everyone's aware of what's going on because it's like a big deal. It's like a big research thing. So we start off, now it's Wednesday, and we start off Wednesday with a successful surgery. Of note, the device that is being used has plutonium in it, and there's like he has to wear a dog tag that indicates like, do not cremate this body, do not do this, like this could be radioactive, make sure you call this number if this person's in distress or dies or whatever. And it's not really a concern because the whole thing is like sealed very well, so there shouldn't be any radiation leak, but it needs to be removed for this cremation or anything, and things need to be taken care of. So after the surgery, they wheel Benson over to his resting room, and they can't start the thing with his brain until so they have to, now they've inserted all the diodes to all the areas that they think if they shoot it with electricity, it will cause like a reverse reaction or like a pleasurable or like a non-angry reaction to kind of like stop the seizure from happening and stop his ADL from causing him to be violent. But they got to go through, and they call it an interface. They got to interface with it to figure out what exact spots they need to do. So they have like, I don't know, they mentioned like a whole bunch, like a ton of these like microscopic like diodes all over the brain. And then when they interface with him, they'll be able to figure out exactly where they need to do, and then they can set it up to automatically do that whenever it recognizes that there's like a seizure going on or something. It kind of seems like some scientific, like some sci-fi magic kind of bullshit, but that'll happen a little bit later. Meanwhile, McPherson's doing a transcription of the whole event, and so they can, I don't know, do a paper or like report it to somebody. And he's talking in his transcription. He's like reflecting upon how Benson has essentially become a computer, which is the thing he was like scared of most. He's then watching a videotape of Benson being paranoid, talking about machines taking over man. Like this is like an older video, and he's like, "Oh, that's interesting." Janet is over in therapy, and she's super mad because no one listened to her. No one wanted to figure out the implications. Like, get your vagina out of here, essentially. And then she gets real mad at her dad. Again, this is something that's like, okay, because he was a surgeon. And then it's just like, all right, well, she's mad. She's got some like daddy issues, I guess, and whatever. But, and then she thinks to herself, being like a psychiatrist and reflecting upon like attachment theory and whatever, that she it's a lot easier to be mad at like her contemporaries for not listening to her for being a surgeon than it is to be at her dad, because that means she has like a broken attachment to her dad and psychobabble bullshit. Anyway. So that's then Morris is doing intakes again, or he's doing a different kind of intake. So before he was like answering calls or whatever, and now he's doing intakes for people trying to come in and get into research. This is when the hippie guy comes in and he's looking to get stimulated to get and then he thinks about like electric addiction, like people getting addicted to pleasure stuff. And this was, I talked about this a bit before, like there's a lot of theories about this, and then at some point he calls in, he has a secretary call in this group of guys to come like watch him deal with this hippie guy, and so they can have like a discussion about technology and about like people becoming addicted to like receiving pleasure through their brains and whatnot, which the thing was kind of interesting, I guess. It was kind of like just some random bullshit. Later on, McPherson, after he finishes his transcription, goes to visit Benson. They talk. Benson's still having his delusions about robots taking over and everything, and machines and whatnot. And so he notes in his chart that that he makes sure to give him Thorazine as soon as like the whole experience is like over with the induction. God, I just said it. What was it? His interface with the interface. And then he thinks about like how people get very like essentially this is just like a pacemaker for his brain to make sure his brain doesn't go into seizures, but that people get really concerned about like mind control and attaching things to cause mind control, and this gets reflected upon more later, but he kind of thinks about that, and he thinks about chemicals are used to keep people like their kidneys working, but the second you talk about the brain, everyone like flips the fuck out. And so this is like going to be a big step towards like helping people with brain problems, because if this works, which it seems like it's working, and then if it's successful, then it's like, okay, maybe the public will be more in line with like allowing this kind of brain surgery stuff to happen that will help people live like more fulfilling lives, right? And then we go over to the nerds. So nerds have these AIs. I mentioned this kind of before. They got these like two AIs, or they don't call them artificial intelligence or anything. They just say they got these computer programs that are like talking to each other and chatting, and they're kind of watching it. And then, like I said, the one of them, the guy, there's like a guy and a gal. The guy one gets like real belligerent, and they're like, oh, we need to fix that. And the other nerd's like, what's going on with this? And he's like, that's not supposed to happen. He's like, yeah, we got to fix that. I don't know what's going on with that. I have no idea what's happening. And that way it can work like it's supposed to. Then we go right into Thursday. So the whole day is just chilling, people catching up with stuff and doing things, whatever. But this time it's on Thursday, or first thing in the morning, it's time for the interface. So Janet continues to be upset. She's thinking about this boyfriend that she had that she broke up with. He was like a super rich guy who like bringing her around because essentially it came down to like he would this rich guy from like another country or whatever, he would just be with all these like bimbos and whatnot, and then he liked being with Janet because she like intellectually challenged him, but essentially she was just like another bimbo to him. She was like more of a curiosity than someone he actually liked being with, and she liked all the attention and like flying to like foreign countries to eat like dinner and whatnot. But then eventually it just kind of like worked. It just kind of didn't work out, and so they had like a date the night before on Wednesday, and then she finally broke up with him. So she's mad about that. She's just mad that no one's listening to her. She's just mad. Anyway, so she heads over to the interface situation that's going on, and Janet sits with him and talk, and then the nerds watch the stimulation going on, and they're kind of tracking things and they're recording everything to make sure it's all like very scientific and proper and whatnot, and various things. And so as they're going through everything, like Janet's just kind of hanging out, talking to him, and then they'll be like, all right, we're gonna, like, I think Morris is there, or it might have been one of the nerds, I can't remember which one of them is standing there, and like, all right, diode number 1, activate, and they activate it, and then he'll be like, oh, I'm remembering like being a child. They're like, oh, your chest looks very attractive today, or like whatever, like, oh, I'm getting angry, whatever. And so then they like record exactly with the diodes and what's going on and doing stuff. And so we go through that for a bit. And at the end, they find 2 areas that should work. One of them kind of causes like orgasms a little bit, and one of them just causes like a sense of peace. So if they activate them both at the same time, like very minutely, that should be able to like quell the seizures. And that will lead to him not having like anger attacks anymore. So the nerds talk to McPherson about getting that kind of set up, and he approves it and whatnot. Afterwards, Janet continues to have concerns. So she goes and talks to the nerds, and she's like, I want you to monitor Benson remotely. I want like reactions to like his seizures and everything. Just like I want like the full like write up on what's going on in his brain and things that are being activated and how often the pacemaker has to be activated like every 10 minutes. And the guy's like, sure, man, we can do that, whatever. And let's see. Then later, they are getting Benson ready to go. They're getting him to go. Where are they getting him to go? Check on the reports. Okay. Yeah, so they're just talking to Benson, and Benson starts to get mad, and then the machine like kicks in and it calms him down, and they're like, awesome, it's working, it's a great success. And everyone's super excited and whatnot. And then Janet comes in a bit later in the day and comes to check in on the reports. And it seems like the seizures are coming like way more often than they were before. So she talks to the nerds about the autonomic response. This is like things your body automatically does, and now you don't have like a control over it, but then like some yogis and Buddhist monks and stuff and other people have like found ways to like do things within their body to like, ignore cold or heat, or to like cause their body to go into like torpor essentially. And that because of that, this is kind of like the same thing. It's like you can't really control these seizures, but or cause the seizures to happen more often. But if you're getting like pleasure every time it's happening, like your body's gonna you're gonna naturally kind of like get your body amped up to do this more. And she feels like that's what's going on with Benson. Because the seizures are coming faster and faster, and it seems like he's actively trying to cause them, because whenever the seizures are about to come on, he gets like all this pleasure and like tranquility and whatnot, and then all of a sudden the report just like goes blank, and they're like ruh-roh. And so that was Friday. All right, so early in the morning, at this point, when the report stopped, Janet goes to check on Benson. And she wants to see how like the Thorazine's going and seeing if that's taken care of, or maybe that's the reason the report stopped or whatever. And she goes and checks and sees the nurses gave it to him, and then she heads over to his room, and he's not there. And so she's like, hey, you guarding this door, what the fuck? Where's this guy? And he's like, I don't know. And so she calls McPherson and Morris, and they all come and they discuss the issue. And then Morris is like, oh fuck, like they're like, how's he gonna get out of here? How could he escape? He's like bald, he's wearing a thing. And they're like, and then Morris is like, oh, some chick brought him a wig. And he's like, a wig, god damn it. And then what about his clothes? He's gonna be wearing like hospital clothes. Can't be that hard to find. And then they track down like an orderly room, and they find just like a bunch of orderly uniforms, and he clearly went in there and got that because like the hospital gown is just like laying in there. And they're like, damn, this motherfucker is smart. We got to find this dude, figure out what's going on. And they like chew out the nurses, and like everyone's getting mad. And they're like, well, maybe we can find him if we find this woman that he came over here with, because she clearly has something to do with this. So at that point, everybody splits up. Janet is like driving over to Benson's like house, and she's like, LA, it's a soulless hellhole, which is a fact. And she's thinking about like traffic and stuff. That comes up a little bit too. So she gets to Benson's house, and she finds some like chicks making out, and she's like, what's up, homies? And they're like, hey, what's up? And they're like, is Benson here? And they're like, oh, he came and he grabbed some like tools, and then he left. And like, so what do you guys think of Benson? It's like, oh, he's so nice, but he's kind of weird. Meanwhile, Richardson heads over to some strip club that Benson frequents all the time, and then he's sitting there, he's like talking, asking around. It seems like he was here, but then he left, and then he sees like the strippers, and this woman just looks like she's a machine, like she's just like stripping. She's not really into it, or her heart's not into the stripping. And then he thinks about like the other nerds and how they talk about like sex robots and stuff, and how in the future like men will have sex with robots and whatnot, which is 100% correct in that. But Benson's not here, so we move on. Morris, he goes over to Benson's work. He talks to some other nerd face, and he's like, they're all about like robots and technology and stuff. And he's like, oh yeah, Benson was a really smart guy and all this stuff. And he was doing lots of good stuff. And we had all these like clearances, and we were onto like a big project. And then, he started getting like angry all the time and like ranting about robots and stuff and being weird. And then it's like, it wasn't even the accident, right? Like, because there was an accident recently where he started having these seizures. But even before that, he was being kind of paranoid about it. And it's like, and then he mentions like the watershed day. And then Morris is like, what the fuck's that? And he's like, well, it's the day the computing power in the world like outstripped the human brain power worldwide. And that was in 1969. So in 1969, the power for computers to like calculate things, like all the computers in the world like outdid like all the human beings in the world or something, or like a computer could outdo all the human brain power in the world. And then that's when Benson started being like, we're fucked, the machines are going to take over or whatever, and it's a dark day. And then Morris reflects that, oh hey, that's the same day the hospital got a brand new computer. That's interesting. At that point, all the doctors like reconnoiter back at the hospital. They discuss what they know, and they get into a disagreement about how serious of a case this is, and how serious Benson is, and how he's like, is he a paranoid schizophrenic? Is he crazy? He's just got a personality disorder? Like, what do they need to do? And Janet is like freaking the fuck out. And then at that point, she like glances over, and she sees like there's that line that people are supposed to call when like the machine, right? So he has a dog tag. This is called this number, and so she sees it lighting up. So she answers it, and it's the police. It's this Anders guy, and he's like, "Hey, I need to talk to you guys. There's been a murder." Dun dun dun. So then Janet heads over to this whore hotel, like one of those hourly ones, and there's police all over the place, and there's definitely like a dead stripper here, and they clearly had sex before he killed her, and they talk about how like the murder was like very robotic. And the coroner's like talking about it, and he's like, "Oh yeah, there's like the way he killed. It was like he could have like he like stabbed her, but then he like stabbed her in such a way that makes it seem like a machine did it. And it was like there was no passion in it. It was just like a thing. And also the guy, and then they like the seizures were going on. They were happening like all the time. And then so Janet finally tells him about Benson and what's going on. And the Anders is like, I need to talk to you more about this whole situation. We need to get like more information. And she's like, I'm really tired. Do you mind just coming to my place? I'm gonna go shower, and then you just come over. And he's like, yeah, okay, I'll meet you over there in a little bit. So back at Janet's place, she's like exhausted already, and so she's like about to take a shower, and then she is taking a shower, and then she hears a knock, and she thinks it's Anders. Spoiler alert, it's not. So she leans out the shower, and she's like, come on in. And then she's like in a towel, and she comes out, she's like, hey, and it's Benson. Dun dun dun. And they have like a very concerning conversation about what is going on, about the seizures, about his brain, about the pleasure. He's like talking like all crazy talk, and then like the machine's taking over, and then he's like, the machines are driving me to do this, and I feel too much pleasure or something. And then he goes over the edge. He has like a seizure, and he's getting violent. And so they fight, and he's about to like overpower her and like strangle her to death. And then she like turns on her microwave oven somehow, and the microwaves like fuck up like the brain implant because of like the microwaves. They interfere with it somehow, and so he like and then he runs away. And at that point, she's like, good night. Later on, Anders actually does show up, and he like helps her, and they talk about what happened, and she's like really fucking shook up. She's got like marks on her neck, so she puts a turtleneck on at some point. Her fingernails are broken, and he's like, all right, I need to write all this shit down. So he does, and then he gets called by the station, and he gets mad because of like office politics, and then they talk about that for some reason, like, you know, hospital politics, right? Which is relevant for her because the whole reason this whole thing with Benson happened is because of like office politics and whatnot, not to actually help the patient or anything. And then she's thinking about other stuff that's going on, and she's thinking about how Morris will probably get fired because like he's like junior enough where, you know, if he gets fired, it's not going to cost you cannot fire McPherson, and then Ellis has like too much like stuff going on. It would like be too embarrassing because he's like a professor or something. And then she'll be fine, but Morris is probably going to get the axe because they're going to blame it all on him and whatnot. And so she is like, hey, let me just call my boss. She calls McPherson to tell him what's going on before they get the police report. And then after the call, we're flip over to like McPherson, Morris, and Ellis. They're all just sitting around. McPherson is thinking about how much longer they need to stay up because they've all been up like all day and all night, and it's like they're kind of everyone's getting exhausted. Like Janet talks. When she's talking to herself, she's like, I'm going to pass the fuck out. So they all talk for a bit, all the other three doctors. And then they think about how everything's been like ahead of schedule. Everything's been going well, and the future looks so bright. And now they're kind of like, fuck, what are we going to do? And then they think about like Form Q, or McPherson's thinking about Form Q. Form Q is the day, is this program they were going to start working on next, which is getting a computer that has the same like brain capacity of like a human being, because like computers in like the 1970s at that point had like the brain capacity of like a mouse or whatever. Like they could like do that stuff, but then someday maybe. But first I got to figure out this Benson bullshit. Janet spends the rest of the morning with Anders, And then she's like really starting to lose it because of like fatigue and lack of sleep and stuff. So at this point, it's like noonish. And then she figures that Benson will go hit the hospital up at some point. And so they head over there. And the hospital, the whole place is like complete chaos. People are losing it. There's lots of concern. There's lots of fear. And the police are like all over the place. And this is because Anders like called in like, hey, we need lots of police support over at this place. At that point, Morris is like watching the autopsy of the girl who got killed, like the stripper. And he's like, he's complaining to himself. He's like, this is why I could never be a coroner. It's like they're slow and methodical. And it's like, maybe I should have been more slow and methodical. And then he hears them talking about how she was like seen recently at a bar near an airport. And he's like, huh. And so he heads over there because when he's thinking about Benson, that same bar is the bar that Benson like lost it and like beat someone up before he got arrested. So he's thinking maybe he'll be over there. So he heads over there. He starts asking around. Someone says something about Benson talking to some pilot somewhere. And then he goes to like talk to that guy. And he goes into the hangar and finds him like dead. And clearly like Benson has killed him. And then he's in there and he's like on top of the plane wing for some reason. And then the lights get cut off and Morris is like, fuck. And then you hear Benson, he's like calling out to Morris and he's like playing tricks and whatnot. And then Morris is a dipshit. So at some point, Benson's like, oh, I need help, doctor, please help me. And then Morris is like sitting there. He's like, I should just be quiet and not say anything. But he's like, no, I must help the patient. And he's like, I'm here, Benson, come to me. And then he gets like hit in the face with like a steel pipe or something. And it knocks him off the wing and he crashes into the ground. He doesn't die though. He's gonna live, but he's all fucked up in the mouth. He's gonna need like a lot of surgery and a lot of like recovery and stuff. And at that point, Ellis and Janet are like watching the surgery going on or watching him being taken off the surgery. And then Ellis just like very casually is like, University of Minnesota contacted me. They want me to come be a professor over there. And she's like, oh yeah, you gonna take it? And he's like, I told them I'm not considering anything until this Benson thing gets kind of like handled. But I'm definitely getting fired from here. So yes. Oh goodness. Janet then heads over to her office where she runs into Anders again, right, which is the cop. They talk for a bit, and then he mentions that, like, oh, hey, we kind of have a lead on the case. Like, we talked to the girls back, like the lesbos back at the house, and they were saying that Benson had, like, these blueprints. Oh, no. The lesbos told Janet that he came and got blueprints along with his tools. What Anders says is that they contacted like the city records office or something, and they found out that Benson went over there and was like faking being an electrical engineer, and then he got the electrical like blueprints for the hospital like a week, like 10 days ago or something. So Benson's been planning like this whole like insane thing that he's doing for a while now. And she's like, I am so tired, and she's like, I need to go lay down. So she goes and finds like a patient's room and falls asleep in there. Elsewhere, Ellis is watching an interview that he did. And then this interview is talking about how brain damage occurs in like 1 in 14 Americans, but mostly it's not violent. But then if you look at like the people who are violent, it's almost always because of like physical brain damage. And then they talk about like mind control, and he gets like super pissed off about that because he's like, education. He's like, what about the public education system? You think public education system is being kids are getting mind controlled, which is based as shit and 100% facts. But people don't want to hear it, so they slap back at him in this like interview. And that's also something Janet was thinking about earlier in the book. And he's mad at his response, but he's watching this interview he did with Anders, and Anders is like, you did a good job. So then we head up Thursday. Oh, wait, it's a Friday, because it was already Thursday. Yeah, so Friday. So Janet is awoken. She gets a call. Like Benson called back in, so they went to grab her, and so she goes to talk to him, and he's completely losing it. And Anders is trying to like trace the call, but he hangs up before they can get to it, and he's like, "Damn it, that was so close." And then a little bit later, like very shortly later, like a minute or two, the phone company calls back, and they're like, "Hey, so we weren't able to trace the call, but we do know for a fact that the call came from inside the hospital. It did not come from outside the hospital." And so they're like, "Fuck." And so they talk about the computer room, and they, and some of the cryptic shit Benson said about computers taking over and all this stuff, and how he got the electrical stuff. They start putting all the pieces together, and they're like, he's probably over the computer, and he's probably going to destroy it, because that was like his whole manifesto or whatever. So they head over there, and they're like wandering around. This part's pretty intense. Like, he's got his pistol out. He gives Janet a gun. He's like, you know how to use this? And she's like, hell no. And he's like, you just point and fucking click. Like, if you need to, you got to fucking kill this dude, or he's going to kill you. And she's like, I don't want to. And he's like, you better get like your head in the game. Otherwise you're going to be fucked. Anyway, they run into like a janitor and somebody else in this area. The whole place is kind of abandoned. It's like where the cafeteria is and stuff. So they're moving around in this like tunnel system, or I think it's just hallways. In my head, it was some sort of like underground tunnel thing or whatever. And then they get to like the computer room area, and then Anders gets like, very tense and whatever. And then they hear moving around in there, and so Anders is like, "Hey, you wait here." And so he like dives halfway into the room onto the ground, and they starts having a shootout with Benson. And then Janet's like, "Holy fuck!" And so she's just like crouched over in like the corner of the room or corner of the hallway. And then there's like this breaking and shattering of a window, and Benson like threw himself out of like this window that was connecting the hallway to like the computer room, and then he makes a run for it. His legs all cut up and there's like blood coming out of it and whatnot, and Anderson's like, "Wait here," and he chases after him, and then Janet's like, "Holy fuck," and then she hears like more shooting and running around like elsewhere, and so she goes in the computer room, and the whole place has been smashed up pretty good. And she's like, "Holy cow, this fucking shit's crazy. Like, I don't know exactly how to feel about this whole situation." And then at some point she hears like some movement, and she turns around, and it's Benson, because he's back, and she's like, "Oh my gosh," and she's having like a complete breakdown because she's like, "Oh, this is perfect. I can talk Benson down, and then we can save the program, and Ellis won't have to like move to Minnesota, and Morris won't get fired, and all this stuff." She's having like a psychotic, not a psychotic. She's having like complete emotional breakdown, and so she starts chatting with Benson, being like, "Yeah, put the gun down, and we'll be okay, and everything's gonna be okay." And then Benson clearly is like, he's like, "That's not how this is gonna work. I'm gonna kill you." And so she's like, "What?" And he's like, "Give me the gun." And then she like picks up the gun, or she like picks up the gun, or pulls out the, like, she's holding the gun, and then she's like, "No." And then finally she realizes she's in a lot of trouble because he's like coming at her with like some aggressiveness. and then she's like, "Stop, ah!" And then she shoots and she misses, and he's like, "It's not so easy, it's not so easy." And so he's coming even closer and closer, and he gets like point blank range, and then she's like, "No!" And then she just starts like firing into him, and she like kills him real good. And then he like collapses, and then she just starts like crying and screaming. Like, God, she's like collapsed on the ground from like killing one of her patients with a gun, right? And then Anders comes in, and he holds her while she like freaks the fuck out. And then these dudes come, and they're wearing like hazmat gears, and they got this like whole device they got to put this guy in so they can like go and take him and get the plutonium out, and then like cremate his body and whatnot. And then she's just like freaking out and crying, and that's the end of the book. Yeah, no, that's the ending. It's just like, fuck. That was pretty wild. Oh man. Anyway, yeah, so that's Terminal Man. It was pretty good. It's definitely not Michael Crichton's best work, but especially that ending was like, what the fuck? So yeah, good times. Go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.